She sat on a Mafia boss's lap to flee her toxic ex. His whisper that night changed everything. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The crystal chandeliers suspended above the grand ballroom of the Pier Hotel did not glitter. They watched. To Sophia, every prism of glass felt like an unblinking eye, cold and judging, much like the wealthy patrons milling beneath them. She adjusted the tray of champagne flutes balanced precariously on her left hand, her knuckles white against the silver plating. Her feet throbbed in the cheap black heels the agency required, but physical discomfort was a distant second to the terror currently clawing at her throat. He was here. She had seen him by the entryway, arguing with the maitre d', until a thick envelope changed hands. Marco. The name alone was enough to make the scar on her ribcage ache phantomly. He looked different than he had 6 months ago, cleaner, wearing a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit his broad, aggressive shoulders, but the look in his eyes was the same. It was the look of a hunter who had cornered a wounded animal. Sophia ducked behind a towering floral arrangement of white hydrangeas, her breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. She had moved 3 times. She had changed her number, her hair color, and her entire life. It had not been enough. Through the gaps in the flowers, she saw Marco scanning the room. He was moving with that terrifying, singular focus she knew too well. He grabbed the arm of a passing waiter, whispering something, and the waiter pointed vaguely toward the service entrance. Panic, hot and blinding, flooded Sophia's veins. If she ran for the exit, he would chase her. If she made a scene, she would be fired, and without this paycheck, she couldn't afford the bus ticket to the next town. She needed to disappear in plain sight. She needed a shield. Her frantic gaze swept the room, skipping over drunk socialites and bored investors, until it landed on the corner booth. The area was roped off with velvet, an island of shadows in the sea of golden light. Sitting there was a man who seemed to absorb the atmosphere around him, silencing the air within a 10-foot radius. Dante Morty. Even a waitress knew the name. The newspapers called him a shipping magnate. The streets whispered that he was the capo of New York, a man whose word was law and whose displeasure was a death sentence. He sat alone, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid, his tuxedo tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He was terrifying. He was dangerous. And right now, he was the only thing in the room scarier than Marco. Sophia did not think. Instinct took the wheel, driving her legs forward before her mind could scream in protest. She dropped her tray on an empty table with a clatter that drew wincing glances, smoothed her simple black dress, and walked. She walked with a confidence she did not feel, cutting through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Marco had spotted her. She could feel his gaze burning into her spine, hear the heavy thud of his footsteps picking up speed. She reached the velvet rope. The large security guard stepped forward to block her, but Sophia slipped past him with a desperate fluidity, breathless and pale. She reached the booth. Dante Morty looked up, his gray eyes sharp as fractured slate, narrowing in assessment. He did not look surprised. He looked ready to strike. "Help me," she whispered, the words barely audible over the swelling violins. Before he could respond, before the security guard could grab her arm, Sophia moved. She stepped into the personal space of the city's most lethal predator, turned, and sat directly on his lap. The contact was electric. His thighs were hard as iron beneath the expensive wool of his trousers. Sophia curled into him, burying her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of sandalwood, expensive scotch, and gun oil. She trembled, waiting to be shoved to the floor, waiting for the humiliation and the inevitable violence. But the shove never came. Instead, a large, heavy hand settled on her waist. It was possessive, the fingers spreading wide to encompass the curve of her hip, pulling her deeper into him. The heat radiating from him was immense, burning through the thin fabric of her uniform. "Look at me," Dante murmured. His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated against her chest. It wasn't a request. Sophia lifted her head, her brown eyes wide and watery, locking with his steel gaze. Up close, he was devastating. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, interrupting the severe perfection of his face. His jaw was set in a line of bored aggression. "Why are you trembling, little bird?" he asked, his thumb tracing the line of her hip bone with agonizing slowness. "He's coming," she breathed, risking a glance over her shoulder. Marco had stopped at the velvet rope. The security guard had stepped aside, confused by the display. Marco's face was a mask of twisted rage, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked at Sophia, then at the man holding her. The recognition dawning on Marco's face was immediate and absolute. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray and sweating. Dante shifted, not to move Sophia, but to better align himself with the threat. He didn't stand. He didn't yell. He simply tightened his grip on Sophia's waist, anchoring her to him, and stared at Marco. It was a look of utter dismissive dominance. "Is this the problem?" Dante asked, his voice pitched low, meant only for her and the man standing 10 feet away. Sophia nodded, a single tear escaping to track down her cheek. Dante watched the tear fall, his expression unreadable. He raised his free hand, one finger extending to point at Marco. "Walk away," Dante said. The volume was conversational, but the tone carried the weight of a tombstone. "Before I decide to repaint this floor with you." Marco opened his mouth, perhaps to posture, perhaps to claim ownership, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Dante Morty, the Wolf of New York, and then at Sophia, perched on his knee like a queen on a dark throne. Self-preservation won out. Marco took a step back, then another, before turning and disappearing into the crowd, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. Sophia let out a shuddering breath, her entire body sagging with relief. She made to stand, to apologize and flee, but the arm around her waist turned into a steel band. She froze. "Sit," Dante commanded softly. She looked down at him. His gray eyes were no longer bored. They were dark, dilated, and fixed on her mouth. "You sat down," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers racing down her spine. "You don't get up until I say so. You wanted my protection, Piccolina. You have it. But everything in this world has a price." I didn't mean to offend you, Mr. Morty," she stammered, acutely aware of the hard planes of his chest against her arm. I was scared." "And now," he asked, leaning in until his lips brushed the shell of her ear, "are you scared now?" "Yes," she whispered truthfully. "Good," he murmured, his hand sliding up her back to tangle in her blonde curls. "Fear keeps you alive. Marco will be waiting outside. He is a coward, but cowards are persistent. You leave with me." "I can't," Sophia protested weakly. "My job." "You just quit," Dante stated, signaling to his security guard with a subtle nod. "You belong to me now. At least that is what every person in this room believes. If you walk out of here alone, the lie falls apart and the wolf comes back for the lamb. Do you understand?" Sophia looked around the room. Dozens of eyes were on them. Whispers were spreading like wildfire. She had tied herself to the monster to escape the beast. She looked back at Dante, seeing the ruthless intelligence behind his gaze. He wasn't offering charity, he was offering a contract. "Yes," she said. "Then smile," Dante said, standing up and lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing. He kept her tucked swiftly against his side, his arm a heavy weight of ownership. "We have an exit to make." The interior of the limousine was a cavern of black leather and tinted glass, hermetically sealed against the noise and grime of New York City. Sophia sat pressed against the far door, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Across from her, Dante Morty stretched out his long legs, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter built into the console. He looked entirely at ease, as if kidnapping a waitress from a gala was a mundane Tuesday activity. "Drink," he said, extending a glass toward her. It wasn't an offer. Sophia took the glass, the amber liquid swirling ominously. She took a sip, the whiskey burning a trail of fire down her throat, shocking her system out of its paralysis. "Where are we going?" "Home," Dante replied simply, watching her over the rim of his own glass. "My home. It is the only place in the city where I can guarantee that rat won't follow." "I can go to a shelter," Sophia said, though the words lacked conviction. "Or a motel in Jersey." Dante laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Marco Spinelli, that is his name, yes. He runs numbers for the Russo family. Small-time, ambitious, stupid. If you go to a motel in Jersey, he will find you in 4 hours. If you go to a shelter, he will wait outside until you leave. You made a public declaration tonight, Sophia. You sat on my lap. In the eyes of the underworld, you declared allegiance. If I let you go and he hurts you, it makes me look weak, and I do not tolerate weakness. Sophia stared at him, the gravity of her impulsive decision settling over her like a shroud. So I'm a prisoner. You are a guest under heavy protection, Dante corrected, setting his glass down. There is a difference. You will have a room, food, clothes. You will be safe. In exchange, you stay visible with me until I can dismantle Marco's little operation without starting a war. It serves us both. The car slowed, turning smoothly into the underground garage of a sleek monolith tower that pierced the Manhattan skyline. Private elevators, biometric scanners, and armed guards greeted them. Sophia felt like she was entering a fortress, or perhaps a high-security vault. The penthouse was breathtakingly cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, millions of diamonds scattered on black velvet. The furniture was modern, Italian, and stark. There were no personal photos, no clutter, no signs of life. It was a museum dedicated to power. The guest suite is down the hall, second door on the left, Dante said, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a leather chair. The movement caused the white dress shirt to pull tight across his chest, revealing the faint outline of ink beneath the fabric. There are clothes in the closet. I had my assistant stock it for contingencies. They should fit. Sophia stood in the center of the vast living room, feeling small and out of place in her waitress uniform. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. You don't know me. Dante paused, his hand on his tie to loosen it. He turned to look at her, and for a second the mask slipped. She saw a flicker of something ancient and weary in his eyes. I know what it looks like when someone is running for their life, he said, and I know what it's like to have nowhere to run. He walked over to her, stopping inches away. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. He reached out, his knuckles grazing her cheekbone. Sophia flinched, expecting a blow, but his touch was feather-light. He hit you, Dante stated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his eyes darkened. It wasn't a question. He was reading the faint, faded yellow bruise on her jaw that makeup couldn't fully hide. Yes, Sophia whispered. He won't touch you again, Dante promised, the words echoing the whisper from the ballroom. Go to sleep, Sophia. Tomorrow we have to convince the world that you belong to me. The next few days were a blur of terrifying luxury. Sophia was thrust into a life she had only seen in movies. Tailors came to the penthouse to fit her for dresses that cost more than her father's house. Stylists arranged her hair. Dante was gone for long stretches of the day, running his empire, but his presence lingered in the apartment like heavy smoke. When he was home, the dynamic was suffocatingly intense. They ate dinner together at the long marble table. He would ask her questions about her life, her childhood, her dreams. He listened with an intensity that was disarming. He learned that she loved painting, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she took her coffee with 3 sugars. In turn, she learned nothing about him, other than the fact that he liked his steak rare and he slept 4 hours a night. The temptation crept in slowly. It was in the way he watched her when she laughed at something on the television. It was in the way he stood between her and the elevator whenever a delivery arrived. It was the feeling of safety, absolute and unshakable, that radiated from him. For a woman who had spent years looking over her shoulder, Dante Morti was a narcotic. One evening, a week into her stay, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Thunder cracked like a whip, shaking the glass walls of the penthouse. Sophia was curled on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow, her eyes squeezed shut. She hated the noise. It reminded her of slamming doors and shouting. She felt the cushion dip beside her. A warm weight settled over her shoulders. Dante had wrapped a cashmere blanket around her. It is just noise, he said softly. The glass is soundproof mostly. It cannot hurt you. Sophia opened her eyes to find him watching her, his face inches from hers. He smelled of rain and tobacco. I know, she murmured. It's just instinct. Instincts are hard to break, Dante agreed. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static that had nothing to do with the storm. "Dante," she breathed, the name feeling foreign and intimate on her tongue. He leaned in, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his thumb brushing the pulse point under her jaw. "You should go to your room, Sophia," he warned, his voice rough. "I am not a gentleman, and you are looking at me like you want to be devoured." "Maybe I do," she admitted, the words bypassing her filter. The safety he provided had morphed into desire. She wanted to know if the fire inside him burned as hot as the ice in his eyes suggested. Dante froze. His pupils expanded, swallowing the gray. For a moment, he looked like he might crush her against him and take exactly what was being offered. But then, with a sheer effort of will that was painful to watch, he pulled back. "Not like this," he said, standing up abruptly. "Not while you are dependent on me. I will not be another man who takes advantage of your vulnerability." He walked to the window, staring out at the lightning-streaked sky, his back a rigid wall of tension. "Go to bed, Sophia, before I change my mind." Sophia fled to her room, her heart pounding, leaving Dante alone with the storm and his restraint, both of which were threatening to break. The illusion of the fortress shattered on a Tuesday. Dante had insisted she accompany him to a private gallery opening in Chelsea. "Appearances," he had said, though Sophia suspected he simply didn't want to leave her unguarded at the penthouse. She wore a dress of emerald silk that hugged every curve, her blonde curls pinned up to reveal the elegant slope of her neck. Dante kept a hand on the small of her back at all times, a brand of ownership that warded off the curious stares of the art world elite. They were near a sculpture of twisted metal when the atmosphere shifted. The crowd parted, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. Marco was there, but he wasn't alone this time. He was flanked by two men who looked like they were carved from granite, soldiers of the Russo family. Dante's hand on her back went rigid. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low and lethal. "Morty," Marco sneered, emboldened by his backup. "You brought my girl, that was kind of you." "She isn't your girl, Marco," Dante said, his posture relaxed but his muscles coiled. "She is the woman you beat, and now she is the woman who belongs to me. You seem to have a learning disability regarding this fact." "The Russos send their regards," one of the flankers grunted, stepping forward. "They don't like you poaching on their territory. The girl returns with us, a gesture of goodwill." "I don't do goodwill," Dante replied, "and I certainly don't trade women like cattle." The violence was sudden and explosive. The flanker reached for a weapon inside his jacket. Dante moved faster than Sophia could process. He grabbed a champagne flute from a passing tray and smashed it across the man's face, spinning to drive a kick into the knee of the second man. Bones crunched. Screams erupted from the gallery patrons. Marco, seizing the chaos, lunged for Sophia. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into her bruised skin. "You're coming with me, bitch." Sophia screamed, thrashing, but before Marco could drag her 2 steps, Dante was there. He didn't just hit Marco, he dismantled him. A fist to the gut doubled Marco over, followed by a knee to the face that sent him sprawling across the polished concrete floor, blood spraying from his broken nose. Dante stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding. But as he turned back to check on Sophia, a flash of silver caught the gallery lights. The second flanker, still on the ground, had slashed out with a switchblade. Dante didn't flinch, but Sophia saw the dark stain rapidly spreading on the side of his trousers, just above the knee. He had taken the blade meant for her path. "Dante," she cried out. "We're leaving," he snarled, grabbing her hand. Security was swarming now, but they parted for Dante Morty like the Red Sea. He dragged her out to the waiting car, his gait uneven but unyielding. Back at the penthouse, the adrenaline crashed. Dante collapsed onto the sofa, his face gray with pain. Sophia scrambled to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit she had seen earlier. She knelt between his legs, cutting away the ruined fabric of his trousers with trembling hands. The gash was deep, ugly, and weeping blood. "It needs stitches," she said, her voice shaking. "We need a doctor." No doctors, Dante gritted out, head thrown back against the cushions. It goes on the record. Hand me the needle and the brandy. I'll do it, Sophia said, surprising herself. My father, he was a vet. I used to help him stitch up hunting dogs. I can do it. Dante looked at her, really looked at her through the haze of pain. He nodded once. For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were Dante's controlled breathing and the snip of scissors. Sophia worked with focused precision, cleaning the wound and sewing the skin back together. When she tied the final knot and bandaged his leg, she sat back on her heels, her hands covered in his blood. Dante reached out, taking her bloody hand in his. You didn't run, he said softly. In the gallery, you didn't run. You were bleeding, she said simply. Dante pulled her up so she was sitting on the sofa beside him. The barrier was down. The invulnerable god was bleeding, human and flawed. My wife, he began, his voice rough, staring at the ceiling. Elena, she died 6 years ago. A car bomb meant for me. I held her while she bled out on the asphalt. I promised her ghost that I would never let anyone close enough to be used against me again. I built this empire, this fortress, to be alone, to be untouchable. He turned his head to look at Sophia, his eyes filled with a tortured conflict. And then you sat on my lap, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to burn the world down just to keep you warm. Sophia felt the tears prick her eyes. This man, who commanded fear from everyone, was just a man terrified of loss. She reached out, cupping his face, her thumb stroking the scar on his brow. I'm not Elena, she whispered, and I'm not going anywhere. You should, Dante groaned, leaning into her touch. Because if you stay, the Russos will come for us. It is war now, Sophia. There is no going back. Then let them come, she said fiercely. I'm tired of running. Dante looked at her with a mix of awe and hunger. The restraint from the stormy night evaporated. He pulled her down to him, his mouth capturing hers in a kiss that tasted of iron and whiskey and desperation. It wasn't gentle, it was a claiming, a seal on a pact made in blood. The morning sun hit the penthouse windows with a blinding brilliance that felt mocking. Sophia woke up tangled in high thread count sheets, alone. The space beside her was cold. Panic, a familiar friend, knocked on her chest, but then the door opened. Dante walked in, fully dressed in a charcoal suit, but he looked tired. He carried 2 cups of espresso. He sat on the edge of the bed, handing her a cup. The accounts are frozen, he said without preamble. The Russos have friends in the banking commission. They are trying to squeeze me out. Sophia sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. Because of yesterday. Because of you, Dante corrected, but there was no blame in his voice, only fact. They are demanding I hand you over. They say it is a matter of principle. Marco has convinced the heads of the 5 families that I stole you, that I disrespected the hierarchy. What will you do? Sophia asked, her stomach churning. I told them to go to hell, Dante said calmly, taking a sip of his coffee. I told them that if one hair on your head is touched, I will turn New York into a graveyard. He set the cup down and took her hand. But this means danger, Sophia, real danger. I have a safe house in Zurich. A new identity, a passport, enough money to live like a queen for 3 lifetimes. The plane is fueling up now. You can go. You will be safe there. And you. I stay, Dante said, his jaw tightening. I have a war to finish. If I leave, I lose everything I built. I lose the territory. If I leave, Sophia said slowly, they will still come for you. You'll be distracted wondering if I'm safe. You'll be fighting alone. I'm used to fighting alone. Not anymore, she said, setting her coffee on the nightstand. She crawled across the bed to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. I'm not going to Zurich. I'm staying here. If they want a war, we give them a war. But I'm not leaving you. Dante closed his eyes, burying his face in her hair. You are a stubborn, foolish woman, he murmured, his arms crushing her to him. But you are mine. The decision was made, but the price was immediate. That afternoon, the power to the building was cut, a warning shot. Dante's security team went into lockdown mode. The penthouse became a bunker. Dante spent the day on encrypted phones, rallying his loyalists. Sophia watched him, seeing the general at work. He was ruthless, barking orders, moving assets, orchestrating violence with the same calm demeanor he used to order dinner. But every time he looked at her, the hardness melted. That night the attack came, not a direct assault but a message. A drone dropped a package on the terrace. Dante's security intercepted it. Inside was a doll with blonde hair, its head severed. Dante stared at the object, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't yell. He went deadly silent. He walked to the gun safe in the wall of his office and began loading magazines. "Dante," Sophia said, standing in the doorway. "They threatened you," he said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Inside my home, they threatened you. What are you going to do?" "I am going to end it," he said, racking the slide of a sleek black pistol. "Tonight, I know where Marco is hiding. He thinks he is safe at the Russo stronghold in the Bronx. I am going to prove him wrong." "I'm coming with you," Sophia said. "Absolutely not," Dante snapped, spinning around. "You stay here inside the vault. It is the only place I know you are safe." "If you die, I'm dead anyway," she argued, stepping forward. "They will come for me the second you are gone. I would rather die by your side than cowering in a panic room waiting for them to break the door down." Dante looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. It mirrored his own. He realized then that she wasn't just a delicate thing he had saved. She was the partner he had been missing. "Put on a vest," he ordered, tossing her a Kevlar vest from the safe. "And stay in the car. If I give the signal, you drive, you don't look back. You drive until the gas runs out." The warehouse district in the Bronx was a labyrinth of rust and shadows. Dante's convoy of black SUVs moved like a funeral procession, silent and deadly. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the yellow streetlights into streaks of blood-colored light. Sophia sat in the back of the armored SUV, the heavy Kevlar vest uncomfortable against her chest. Dante sat beside her, checking his weapon one last time. He leaned over and kissed her, hard and fast. "Stay down," he commanded. Then he was gone, slipping into the night with his men. The waiting was the worst part. Every gunshot that cracked through the air made Sophia jump. She counted the seconds, her breath fogging the window. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Then the radio on the dashboard crackled. "Ambush! They knew we were coming. Boss is pinned down." Sophia stared at the radio. The driver, a stoic man named Luca, cursed and reached for his gear. "Stay here, miss," he grunted, opening his door. "No," Sophia yelled. She scrambled over the center console into the driver's seat as Luca exited. She locked the doors. She wasn't going to sit here. She slammed the car into drive and floored it. The SUV roared, tires spinning on the wet pavement. She drove straight toward the sound of the gunfire, crashing through a chain-link fence. The scene inside the warehouse yard was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark. She saw Dante behind a stack of crates, outnumbered, suppressing fire keeping him pinned. Marco was on a catwalk above, laughing, taking potshots with a rifle. Sophia didn't think. She laid on the horn, a long, deafening blast that drew every eye in the yard. She drove the massive armored vehicle straight at the scaffolding supporting the catwalk. There was a sickening crunch of metal on metal. The scaffolding buckled. Marco screamed as the catwalk collapsed, sending him tumbling down to the concrete floor in a heap of steel and dust. The distraction was all Dante needed. He broke cover, moving with terrifying speed. He double-tapped 2 Russo soldiers who were disoriented by the crash, then sprinted toward the wreckage of the catwalk. Sophia stopped the car, her chest heaving. She saw Dante haul Marco out of the debris. Marco was battered, broken, begging. Dante didn't hesitate. He leaned down, whispered something in Marco's ear, likely the same promise he had made to Sophia, and ended it. A single shot. The threat was gone. Silence fell over the yard as Dante's men secured the perimeter. The remaining Russo soldiers surrendered, seeing their leadership decimated. Dante walked toward the SUV. He was soaked, his suit ruined, blood on his face. He looked like the devil himself. He ripped the driver's side door open. Sophia braced herself for him to be angry, for him to scream at her for disobeying orders. Instead, he dragged her out of the car and into his arms, burying his face in her neck, shaking uncontrollably. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman," he gasped against her skin. "You could have been killed." "I told you," she sobbed, clutching his wet jacket. "I'm not leaving you." Dante pulled back, framing her face in his large, rough hands. The rain washed the blood from his cheek. "It is done," he said, his voice breaking with relief. "Marco is dead. The Russos are broken. It is done." "Is it?" she asked. "Yes," he vowed. "Tomorrow I reshape the empire. No more wars. We legitimize. I have enough money to buy the city. I don't need to fight for it anymore. I want a life, Sophia, a real life, with you." He kissed her then, in the pouring rain, amidst the wreckage of their enemies. It was a kiss of promise, of a future carved out of violence but built on love. 6 months later, the charity gala at the Met was the event of the season. Cameras flashed as the city's elite walked the red carpet. A limousine pulled up, and a hush fell over the crowd. Dante Morty stepped out, looking regal in a tuxedo, the scar on his brow the only hint of the violence he had left behind. He turned and offered his hand. Sophia took it. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, her head held high, the fear that had once defined her completely gone. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen. They walked the carpet together, his arm around her waist, not a cage, but an anchor. "They are all looking at you," Dante whispered in her ear, his lips brushing the diamond earring he had given her. "Let them look," Sophia smiled, squeezing his hand. "I only see you." Dante pulled her closer, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "And that," he whispered, "is the only thing that matters." They walked into the light, together untouchable.